What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Warrior Soul podcast. This is Chris Albert, and I am joined today by Mr. Michael Franzese. Michael was a Capo Regime in the Colombo Crime Family, and he was known for being one of the most prolific mobsters in history. As far as earnings go, he is up there with Al Capone. He's known for being one of the highest earners in history. And there's been a lot of comparisons with him between, if you've ever seen The Godfather, with Michael Corleone, the famous character from that movie. Michael, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. Appreciate it.
You know, I've been going through your history. I've been going through hundreds of interviews you've done. I've seen your transformation. And, you know, when we think about the Mafia, I grew up on the East Coast. My mother was Italian. I wasn't raised by my non-Italian side of the family. So when I talked to relatives and they would talk about the Mafia, it was like a form of worship. It was like they admired you guys. And, you know, when we think about you and the transformation you've made, one of the things I want to start with is that with everything we're going to talk about today, I know that you're not condoning that lifestyle. It's something that you've transitioned from, and you found God, and you are living a very different life today, right?
Yeah, Chris, excuse me. And I like to make that clear. I never glorify the lifestyle because I don't believe it's a lifestyle that should be glorified, mainly because, you know, families are devastated in the process of guys like us becoming members of that life. But I also want to be clear is I don't denigrate some of the guys in that life. You know, I mean, I happen to be one of them. I just happen to be very blessed and fortunate as to where I am now. So it's more the lifestyle that people should understand. It's not a lifestyle that should be glorified. So, but I want to make that clear because I did have many friends in that life. Unfortunately, most of them are gone. They're either dead or in prison. But, you know, and I feel for them and their families. But, you know, I've just been very fortunate.
And you weren't supposed to be in this life. You weren't supposed to be a mobster, right? Your father didn't want it for you. Your father was an underboss in the Colombo Crime Family, got a lot of press at the time. But you were actually a pre-med student at Hofstra, right?
Yeah, I mean, I never aspired to be part of that life, even though I grew up in it. My dad was a very prominent figure. You know, a major target of law enforcement, very high profile. So I grew up in that life and saw a lot as a kid, but never wanted to be part of it. I mean, my dad wanted to keep me out of it, wanted me to go to school. He actually wanted me to become a professional. A doctor was his chosen profession. And I was an athlete in school. So I was on that course, you know, for all the stuff that was always going on with him. You know, and there was a big circumstance in our life that kind of changed my direction.
What was that circumstance?
Well, my dad had been indicted several times in the state of New York for some very serious crimes, and he went to trial and was acquitted in all those cases. But then in 1966, he was indicted for masterminding a nationwide string of bank robberies in federal court, eventually convicted and sentenced to 50 years in prison. And for me, you know, my dad was 50 when he went in. That was kind of a death sentence, I thought. And he told me he was innocent, and we would have to work hard to try to prove his innocence. And my dad thought that, you know, a way for me to help him would be to be part of his life so that we could, you know, raise money, track down witnesses that he alleged lied about him and that I totally believe. And that was really the change of course for me.
And just so the audience knows, I saw a picture of your father the other day on Instagram, and today he's in his hundreds, right?
Yeah, he'll be 103 on February 6th.
Wow. So that didn't turn out to be a life sentence. He's out now, and I got to say, you guys have really good genes because he looks fantastic for a 103-year-old guy.
He really does. I mean, his family is, you know, they live pretty long lifestyles, but he's outlived them all. But he did do 40 years on that 50. You know, he did all his time. He maxed out. As a matter of fact, my dad is still on parole And if you know, in the federal system, they've abolished parole. I believe he's the only person left on parole, and his parole ends in June of this year. So he will have done his whole 50, whether in prison, on parole. Amazing, amazing.
Wow. Wow. And so when you had decided to come in, I've listened to a lot of these interviews. You went through a recruit process, and then eventually you became
Yes.
a made guy, right? And one of the things I heard is that in the ceremony, it was Halloween night, 1975, where you became a made man. There was 5 or 6 individuals who went through that ceremony with you, and you're the only one left alive, right?
That's correct. There were 6 of us, and the other 5 are all gone. They're all dead.
Now, I got to ask you this because, being the guy who's known for bringing the mob from the street to the boardroom, what do you think it was about you, your vision, your ability to think, your business acumen that made you so successful?
Well, I attribute that to having early on into the lifestyle and the business, go through high school and 2 years in college, which most of my associates hadn't gone through. And I had a head for business, and I knew how to use that life to benefit me in business. And I think I was able to take, the knowledge that my father provided and my experience with that life, my business head, and kind of put it all together and do some things differently than were done in the past. And as a result, made a significant amount of money.
Yeah, that's one of the things that a lot of people, when they think of the mob, they're thinking of shaking down local restaurants or local establishments and things like that. But you had a very different take. You were going after the big fish. You were going after the government. You were going after big corporations and things like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, my targets were always, never the man on the street or never the business owners, but, I went after banks, unfortunately, insurance companies. The federal government was my biggest mark, I would say. All institutions that could afford to take a little bit of a hit. But, I do want to say this. One of the reasons my former life survived for well over 100 years under some very difficult conditions is because we were able to infiltrate every fabric of society, from the man on the street with the numbers business right up to the White House. And, we controlled, major unions in this country, which gives you a tremendous amount of not only wealth, but power politically in every other way. So we were able to do that. A lot of the guys in my former life, I don't sell them short. If they would have went into legitimate business, they probably would have been very successful. It was just that kind of a lifestyle. And, it bred some of those type of guys to where they would have been, pretty successful, I think, in the legitimate world.
And, when you're thinking about that, because, as you're coming in, a lot of this is based off of who your relationships, the people around you, your ability to build a team or a crew or around what you're doing, right? So you have to be a good leader, and you have to be a really good networker too.
Yeah, and it wasn't always about, in our lifestyle, we tried to get close to people. We tried to get people in our confidence. We didn't turn them off. We weren't looking to buy everybody. We made a lot of good relationships. I mean, I had friends in very high places, as the saying goes, and so did some of my associates. So, and people just liked to be around us. They really did. I mean, whether it was the thrill of the power they felt with us, I can't really explain it, but we attracted a lot of people on a very high level.
And that's one of the things I think, with our audience, like I said, most of our audience is combat veterans, U.S. Marine Corps, U.S. Army. One of the things that I heard you say is that what you miss about the lifestyle is the brotherhood you had with other people who were in it, the camaraderie. How was that? How did that feel as you were coming up?
Well, Chris, that was really the most attractive part of the life for me. For me, it was all about being bonded, not only as father and son, but in a very special way through this blood oath that I took with my dad. having this brotherhood of guys around me. You know, when I came into the life, they said, "Hey, Mike, wherever you go in the world, you don't have to worry. You'll have a brother there because we're everywhere. Don't ever worry about your wife, your sister, your mother. We always have your back." And to me, there's nothing more powerful than this bond, you know, among men, or among people of, you know, similar purpose in life that have each other's back. And when people ask me, what do you miss about that life? Is it the money and the power? And it's really not, Chris. I mean that. I mean, I'm comfortable. God's been good to me. But it's that camaraderie, that brotherhood that I shared with so many of the guys that was very, very powerful for me.
And I think that's so important for those guys at home to understand that, because, you know, when I talk to a lot of veterans and as they're coming into their civilian lives, you know, they end up getting married. They kind of shed a lot of the things. They focus on their jobs, they focus on what they're doing, but they leave that kind of male brotherhood behind. And, you know, what I see you doing now, and we'll talk about that in a bit with your ministry and your contributions to society, now that you've changed your life, you're kind of developing that kind of camaraderie again. And I think that's so important for guys to try to rekindle in their civilian lives.
Well, you know, I think that's very important, you know, and you know, in the military, and I tell you, Chris, I've been a great supporter of military my whole life, really, because I realize, you know, what they're doing for our nation, for our country, for our people, and they're heroes. And, you know, it's hard, you know, we have to deal with our families and so on and so forth. But, you know, like just this morning, before you and I, you know, got on this call, I mean, a brother had texted me and said, "Hey, we need to talk today. I'm going through some struggles." And, you know, you just got to have each other's back and pull each other up, because this world is pretty hard to navigate at times. You know, things come and hit us. Distractions come from anywhere. Sometimes we can't control it. And you got to have somebody that you can trust and lean on and talk to. And it's very helpful. And, you know, what I missed from my former life was a camaraderie, but as you said, we'll get into that. I've been able to kind of duplicate that now in a better way in the ministry that I'm involved in.
Absolutely. Now, as you were coming up, you know, just to give people a little bit of a sense of the numbers here, you got involved in a gasoline racket that was raking in at certain times $8 to $10 million a week. Is that correct?
That's correct. We devised a scheme to defraud. It was very simple in its concept. We defrauded the government out of tax on every gallon of gasoline. Now, the execution of that was, you know, pretty complicated, but that was the concept. We were basically, you know, stealing tax money. That was it.
And the thing about you is, you know, when you came in, they said the books were closed for a long time as far as making made men, right? And then yeah, you were very young compared to a lot of the other mobsters and people like that at the time. So there must have been, was there a lot of jealousy or anything like that? People who were kind of, I guess you could say, jealous of your position and jealous of what you were doing?
Yeah, and so the audience understands, they had not brought guys into the family for about 20, 25 years. And the reason for that, it was kind of security reasons. The only way a family would be able to make another guy or bring him in is if they replace somebody that passed away. But then in the mid-70s, they opened the books, they said, and they were recruiting and bringing more guys into all 5 families in New York. So I came in under that wave. But I came in with guys that were waiting 20 years. You know, they were a lot older than me. And then, of course, you had the old-timers that have been around in that life. So when you start, you know, it's like anything else. When you're a young guy and you start to get success and people start to notice you and you're coming up against some of the older guys, there's resentment there. You know, hey, I paid my dues. I've been here 25 years. You know, who are you to come up and come against me? So I had to deal with that. And, you know, you had to be, you just had to know how to navigate the older guys because, you know, Chris, you didn't want to make enemies in that life.
Right.
You really didn't. It's not a life that you, you know, that's good if you make enemies. Let's put it that way.
Right. Everybody has fangs. Everybody could hurt each other one way or another. And if you did cross somebody, there'd be a price to pay, right?
It could be, you know, and you know, things work against you. There's a lot of politics in that life. So you don't want to breed contempt among people because one day you may be put on the spot And if somebody that's deciding your fate is somebody that resents you or you came up against or you were disrespectful to, well, they'll remember it at that point, and the consequences could be severe.
And this concept of a made guy, one of the things I heard you say is that, if you're sitting down with somebody and you hear another made guy tell a lie, you couldn't call him out on the lie. You couldn't say that was a lie. Otherwise you lost the argument, right?
That's correct. Respect among us was a very big issue, and disrespect was really not tolerated. And so if we had a sit down where we were deciding something, whether it be a business deal or anything even more importantly, and you knew another made guy was lying through his teeth, you couldn't call him a liar, because if you did, you'd automatically lose the argument. So you had to learn how to be respectful, learn how to get your point or get your way, but do it in an intelligent way so that you presented your argument in a way that you couldn't lose. And there was a skill involved in that, a negotiating skill that was involved in that, I was able to, I think do a good job with, because I sat down with so many guys so often, and a lot of the older guys, because a lot of people wanted to get involved in the gas business. And I had, a lot of work either keeping people out or keeping people happy. So I was sitting down with older guys all the time.
So you really had to become like a student of human nature. You had to really be able to read people, read their personalities, be able to tell what type of guy a person was, and really kind of maybe have a good radar for what they were going to do or what their actions would be or how to deal with them, right?
Oh, absolutely, Chris. That was critically important in that life. When you were going to sit down with somebody, you had to know their personality, their temperament, in order to get what you wanted or succeed in that sit down, that meeting, you really had to be prepared, or you would just get wiped out. Because, the older guys, they knew the life. They were students of the life, and they were around for a long time, and they knew how to put you in a situation, maybe trick you or trap you. One thing I learned going in, I learned this, which has been a major benefit to me throughout my life, is to be a good listener, to be very slow to speak, listen, make sure you hear everything before you respond. And when you do respond, keep it short. Don't get into things where, I got this skill 2 reasons. Number one, from being on trial so many times and listening to witnesses, mistake themselves. And then, of course, sitting down with people that were, a lot more cagey than I was. Let's put it that way.
Right. And that's so important. Rather than coming in like a hot head or trying to be the loudest person there, you want to sit back, you want to observe, you want to be able to learn as much about the people who are there before you act, right?
Oh, yeah, Chris. I learned 2 skills that really benefited me. There's not times when you're the smartest person in the room, and you don't want anybody to know that. So you keep quiet and you let everybody else do all the talking, and then you just get them in the end. And there are other times when you're not the smartest person in the room, and you don't want people to think that you are, or you want people to think that you are. So by saying very little and observing and some facial expressions, you kind of put them, on notice that, hey, I know what I'm talking about, and I know what you're saying, even though I don't. And it's an effective strategy. It worked for me so many times. And then by listening to that person, you learn everything. So by the end of the conversation, you know as much as they do.
Absolutely. And one of the things I've heard you had interactions with John Gotti. And one of the things about John Gotti was that you had to make him think he won the argument. Otherwise it would be, it wasn't going to be good for you, right?
Yeah, John had the kind of personality that he just could never lose. Mm-hmm. So if you were up against him in any kind of situation, you had to make him think that he was winning the argument. And you had to know going in, okay, I'm either going to get this or settle for this, but I'm going to let John think he won. Because at the end of the day, you just want to come out of there with what you want to come out of there with. Doesn't matter who thinks what. Or who says what. And, that was, and sitting down with John, like I said, I like John. He wasn't good in business because he really didn't understand it. He was tough to deal with, but socially he was a lot of fun. He was great. I mean, we had, been in places together where we had a couple of drinks and he was a great guy in that way, but business-wise, very difficult to deal with.
Now, I want to ask you this because, again, like we said, you were taking in more money than a lot of these guys had ever seen, and you're at the top. But then problems started, right? So you started getting indicted. You started having legal troubles. How did that all start?
Well, my dad was back in the '60s, Chris. He was the John Gotti of his day. He had as much publicity in the '60s. Obviously, we didn't have social media back then, as Gotti had, in the '80s and the '90s. So my family name was very prominent, and it kind of, came on to me. And so when I started making some money, I became, I got the attention of law enforcement, the media, the whole thing the same way. So in that life, it's not good because then you become a prize for law enforcement. Then they want to take you out. They want to cut you down. So, yeah, so that all came on me. And I think I had 17 or 18 arrests, and I ended up with a total, I was just thinking about it. I was actually indicted 7 times. I had 2 federal racketeering cases. I went to trial 5 times. So they just kept coming at me, Chris, and I was beating all these cases. I was winning in court, but still they just kept coming at me. And, it was only a matter of time. I knew that I would take a fall.
Now, when you're going through that, because obviously when you're making money, you're obviously spending more money. You obviously had really, really high lawyer fees, probably putting a lot of their lawyers charged by the hour, right? So they're putting on the billable hours onto your case. What's going through your mind when this starts? What's your mentality while the government's starting to come after you?
Well, understand this. I didn't like the government, obviously, because, to me, I saw them as the enemy through that point. So, but I was always a fighter, and fortunately, I had the resources to fight. So they never really had a strong case against me, Chris, honestly. They were, Giuliani indicted me on a racketeering case that wasn't a strong case, and I was acquitted in court after a lengthy trial. I had 3 or 4 state cases that I were all either acquitted or dismissed on. So I fought, and the one thing that I was taught, my dad was never good in defending himself. He left everything up to his lawyer, and as a result, he didn't put up a good defense. Well, I learned from that, and I said, look, nobody's going to railroad me. I'm going to work hard. I had an understanding of the law, so I worked along with my lawyers. I hired investigators, and I put up a very strong defense. And as a result, I was fortunate, and I was able to, to beat all of these cases. So, but it was a lot of work, a lot of money. I mean, my cases, between my fines, my restitution later on, my attorney's fees, I went for over $30 million.
Wow.
And that's why I feel for these guys today, a lot of them, even if they're not related to anything in organized crime, I mean, it's very, very costly to fight a case. So people say, oh, well, you're free. Yeah, but look at the expense. Look at the care on your life that you had to go through, especially if you were innocent. So it's a tough system to beat if you're not prepared and you don't have good resources.
The other thing is, when your father was in your father's day, guys were getting like 5 to 10 years. But when RICO started, I mean, your case could have added up to 150 years, right?
Well, that's a great point. I mean, Giuliani, when I was indicted on that RICO case, he told me in the courtroom, if I convict you, you're going to get double what your father got. And that's 100 years. And if you look up the time that guys were getting in the 80s, they were getting hundreds of years, 50 years, 70 years, 100 years. And remember, they abolished parole at that point. So you're doing 85% of your time. There's no good time that's going to work towards parole. So it was life and death practically. You had to work hard or you're going away forever. And I realized that. And so I put all my efforts. I mean, I literally, in the Giuliani case, I was on trial for several months. My preparation, I worked 24 hours a day almost for, a year and a half to win that case. I put everything I could into it. And, obviously the result was good. But look at the toll it took on me, my family, the expense. I mean, it was rough.
Now, you ended up serving 10 years. How did that come about? How did you just get 10 years?
Well, here's the thing. After all of these victories I had, the one case that they had coming up in the Eastern District of New York, another federal case, was this whole, gas case, I would say. And my partner in that became an informant, and he implicated me and, had me as the mastermind of the whole case. So I knew it was a difficult case. However, this same informant testified against me in the Giuliani case, and I was acquitted. So the government was very leery that they would take me to trial again and lose, because we just beat their major witness in another big case across town. So I had leverage at that point in time. And what happened, Chris, it's good to have leverage with the government. They wanted a conviction on me. And when I told my lawyer, I said, look, every time I beat them, they come back at me again. I said, I'm going to take a plea. I'll give them some money. I'll do a couple of years in prison. Let's negotiate the best deal I can. And he didn't realize that my overall plan was to try to quietly walk away from that life, because I knew it was only a matter of time if I stayed there that, I'm either dead or in prison for the rest of my life. I became too much of a high-profile guy. And basically that's what's happened. We negotiated a plea over several months where I got a 10-year prison sentence, which at that time was like a blessing, I got to tell you, to get only 10 years. I had a $15 million restitution and forfeitures and so on and so forth. And I went off to do my time. And at that time, I wrapped everything up. Everything that was outstanding against me, the government couldn't prosecute me for unless it was a murder. And I wasn't worried about that. So to me, it was a way of wrapping everything up and then doing some prison time, which I knew I would do anyway at some point. And just try to move away from that life and live out my life. That's what it was all about.
Now, you look at a guy like you versus, some of your compatriots, right? You were able to walk away. Take a guy like Sammy the Bull Gravano, who, obviously had a lot of publicity because he turned on John Gotti. He turned on his family. The guy killed, I think it's like 30 something people, and ended up not doing any time, went into witness protection, got popped for selling ecstasy. He just got out again. Right. Why were you able to make that decision to walk away and say, I'm going to turn my life around, versus somebody like that, or maybe some of your other compatriots who continually got wrapped back up into the life?
Well, look, when it comes to Sammy, I knew Sammy, and, I've made it a point, Chris. I don't try to make my way by bad-mouthing other people, but, you bring it up, I'll just comment on it. Sammy admitted to 19 murders. He admitted to it. And he actually, when he became an informant, I believe he put 35 or 36 of my former associates away in prison. And he did some time in the program, and now he's out and he's doing interviews and so on and so forth. Hey, God bless him, let him make his way. But, for me, what's bad about that is, how does the government make a deal with somebody that admitted to 19 murders? I mean, basically, he said, I'm a serial murderer, but because I'm cooperating and I'm going to testify against John Gotti, you're going to give me this kind of a break. In that case, lies with prosecutors that would make a deal like that. And of course, Sammy got out, and, it's very hard to make a break from that lifestyle. So when he got out, he went back to what he knew best. And he started, this ecstasy ring, and then ended up back in prison again. So, in order to walk away from that life, there has to be some life-changing, transforming experience in order to break the hold that life has on you. Because, Chris, I'll be honest, I felt horrible when I betrayed my oath in a way. Now, I didn't put anybody in prison. Nobody ever went to prison because of anything I ever said to law enforcement, government, or anything else. That wasn't my way. I was offered that. I was offered the program. I didn't want to do that because I wasn't looking to hurt people. I just wanted out of the life. So, I spoke to the government. I tried to patch things up with them so that they would leave me alone. I can go on and do my life, but never to the point of putting anybody in prison. That's not what my deal was. So, it's very, very hard. I mean, I would go to sleep walking away from that life, and I'd wake up back in it because I felt I was betraying my oath, betraying my associates. It was a horrible feeling because, remember, I took a blood oath. I was mentally, physically, emotionally involved in that life, and it's a whole subculture from everything else that exists. And so it was so hard to break that hold that that life had on me. And it was only through my faith that I was able to do that. And that wasn't easy either. It took a long time before my faith overtook my allegiance to that life.
How did that start? Was it in prison where you found your faith? Was it any particular moment, or was it a slow buildup?
It was my wife and my mother-in-law that were strong Christians, strong people of faith, that introduced me to the faith. But I wasn't really buying into it at that point. It was okay. It sounded good, and I respected them for what they believed. And I grew up as a Catholic, okay. But I always felt, look, I'm my own person. God helps those who help themselves, and I got to do my thing and see how it works out. But there was a moment that lasted several years. Now, what I mean by that, I did 5 years in prison on that conviction. I got out on parole for 13 months. It was the worst 13 months of my life because it became public that I was walking away. My dad kind of disowned me, contract on my life. The feds were all over me. I had a really rough 13 months on the street, and I violated my parole. The government was upset with me because they wanted me to cooperate. Honestly, I was playing a little game with them, make them believe I was, but then at the end, I wouldn't do it when they really pushed me. And they were upset with me. I fall into a trap, violate my parole, and they told me, Franzese, that's it, you're done. We got new witnesses against you. We're going to indict you on another case. You'll never see the street again. You're going to lose everything. It was just bad. And they put me in a 6x8 cell that first night. And Chris, it was the first time in my life that I ever felt hopelessness. I said, there's nothing I can do. They got me. They beat me. I'm going to lose everything I got. I'm going to lose my wife. We were only married, a short time, 6-7 years. We had 2 little children. I said, I'm going to lose the girl I did all of this for. I'm never going to see the street again. It was the worst feeling in the world. And I like to say this because I wanted people to understand how intense it was. I used to demean people that were suicidal. And I'm ashamed of that now because I know there's reasons for that. But I would say, hey, you're weak. You can't face up to your problems. You're a weak person. I don't do that anymore because that night I felt so low. I wasn't suicidal. I wasn't that brave, but I wanted to lay my head on that pillow and not wake up because it was too painful to think of the loss in my life and the future being 39 or 40 years old in a 6x8 cell for the rest of my life. I said, just take me. I can't even think about it. And I was at such a low that night that, without getting into all the dramatics of it, a prison guard kind of handed me a Bible. And that's when my journey started. And I ended up spending almost 3 years in solitary. It was 29 months and 7 days to be exact. And it was during that time, for a number of reasons, that my faith really strengthened and grew. And I came out of there a believer.
Wow. And, that's such an important point to make because, a lot of the guys who are listening right now, they've gone through their own struggles like that. And, a lot of us, I mean, if you asked me back in the day, if you asked me about suicide, a lot of us in our community would have said, okay, you're weak. That's not a way to go. That's for cowards and weak people. But, those things come up. Life is a crazy, crazy thing. And, it's a fact of life that if you're looking out at the world and you're waiting to be broken, the world will break you if you look for it. But finding something like this that could potentially change your life, that could give you hope and put love back in your heart, that's such an amazing thing.
Oh, it is, Chris, and again, not too long ago, about a year ago, I spoke at a church and a young man handled me that day. He hosted me and I had met him before, had everything in life going for him. I didn't realize he was struggling so hard with depression. He had a beautiful young wife, children, had a great position in the church, presented himself so well. And we found out that, he spent the day with his family, he even had it on video, everything going for him with his kids at the park, looked like he was happy as can be. And that night he committed suicide. He took his own life. The community was devastated. I was shocked. The pastor of the church, we were shocked. We realized that he was suffering with depression, but so intense that a guy that seemed to have everything going in his life took his own life. And it struck me so hard because, I realized there sometimes people have such pressing things, but, there has to be something inside of you that you really believe. There has to be that love. There has to be, hope. Without hope, what do you have in life? I mean, really, without hope for things turning better, without hope for life beyond this life, what do you really have? So those things have to be inside of you. And I don't see how people really get beyond their struggles without having God in their life that they believe in. And, it's not a fairy tale. It's not trying to give yourself something just to, to strengthen you. I don't kid myself. Believe me, if I didn't believe and I said this is all nonsense to me, I wouldn't believe. And, and the last thing I'm trying to do to you, I don't impose my faith on anybody. I don't do that. I don't try to turn anybody into a Christian, but I do try to direct them because I think it'll be life transforming for them if they can believe the things that I believe and experience what I've experienced in my life. Because, Chris, I should be dead or in prison for the rest of my life. I really should. If you look at the course that's gone over the years, there's only one reason that I believe I'm here, and that's because God had a different plan and a purpose for my life. None of it makes sense. None of it makes sense. And, look, I firmly believe it. Like I said, I'm not trying to impose my faith on anybody. I'm just trying to tell people, look, if you're struggling, if you got challenges in your life, if you feel hopeless, there is a way to turn that around.
We talked a little bit about your father and just bringing this concept in how, it seems like you had somebody looking out for you. You had an incident with your father where your father kind of threw you under the bus. And I've heard you mention that and you forgave your father and you guys are good today. But I've heard you say that was kind of the seed in your mind that said, if he hadn't done that, you'd probably still be involved with the life, right?
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, look, I hate to say this because if my father was listening, he'd be very hurt by it because he denies it, but I know it's true. He did betray me. He kind of threw me under the bus. And it just goes to show you how life can interfere in the love even of a father and son. When something else, comes into play, it's a terrible thing. And I realized that if that life can separate father and son, that we had such a close bond and I loved him and I know he still loves me and I still love him. But there was something, an outside source that was so powerful that it was able to separate us. So I never said anything about that. It wasn't until 2 years later that I met my wife and things started to change. But yes, if that incident didn't happen, I don't believe I would have ever walked away because I could have never, ever thought my father, have my father think that I was betraying him. Never. But I believe also that was a way of God breaking that hold that my dad had on me because he really did. I mean, my whole life, my young life was formed by my trying to please my dad. And I mean that. I mean, that was my motivation. I want to make my dad happy. I want to please my dad. It formed my whole life. It made me a better student in school. It made me a better athlete. It made me a better kid at home. I was a good kid in the house, probably the best kid in the house. Of all my brothers and sisters, they've all had issues. I was probably the one that, they relied on the most and took care of my mother and the whole bit. But it was all to please my dad. And so he had such a hold on me that I believe God had to break it. And that's when he did it, because otherwise I wouldn't have walked away.
Yeah. Now, and I want to say this because, a lot of times people will think you did your time in prison, you get out, everything's good to go. The government you still owed the government quite a bit of money when you got out, right?
No, they had a $103 million fine on me. Yes.
So when you're coming out and you're trying to rebuild your life, and the reason why I want to get into this is because, a lot of these guys, they're listening, they're going through their own transitions. They're trying to get into school. They're trying to, head into the civilian life. They're trying to set their lives up. How did you get through that period? Owing $103 million to the U.S. government. How did you get through that and on to where you are now?
Well, Chris, it's a good point. I mean, I had as many struggles and challenges when I got out of prison, maybe more than before I went in. You don't rebuild your life. You don't walk away, overnight with that. I mean, even until today, I mean, there's repercussions from my former life, even until today. It doesn't go away. But, look, I always persevered. I always believed in myself because I believed God had my back. And, my wife and I, she was tremendously supportive. And I'll tell you what's important, Chris. You got to be held accountable by people that have your best interests at heart. Accountability in this life is so important. You got to have an accountability partner, a wife, children, whatever. Because, look, I say this, and I don't want to be offensive, but, I didn't get a lobotomy when I walked away from that life. I still have a lot of things in my head that at times are not right. For instance, I could go back into the gas business and steal taxes from the government, and I wouldn't have any moral issue with it. I just wouldn't. But I won't do it because my wife holds me accountable. I don't want to go back to jail. My children hold me accountable. My ministry holds me accountable. Without that, I might still be a rogue guy. I don't know. Accountability is so important. Accountability to God is important because he's always there and there's no way to hide. So having this accountability is what helped me get from where I was to where I am today, and hopefully it will continue. But I want your listeners to understand it's not easy. You're still going to face struggles. You're still going to face challenges. God never promised us heaven on earth. He promised us heaven in heaven, but he did promise that he'd have our backs all the way through. And I have found that to be so true. And that's what keeps me going, because I know, at the end of the day, it's going to end up okay for me no matter what happens here on earth.
And so now, you've gotten you have your ministry, you're a speaker, you're setting up legitimate businesses. In your mind, and you mentioned that you still have some of those things in your head. And one of the things I always say is that a good man is not a harmless man. A good man is somebody who has the ability to do harm, but then chooses to go the right way. All right. And that's a really important point to make here. As you're going into your new business career, you've got projects, you've written books, have you been able to apply a lot of the things you've learned from your mob career to this new life in a positive way?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of the business skills that I learned on the street, especially the negotiating skills, I brought with me, and they've been very helpful. How to communicate with people in a respectful way has been very helpful to me. I always say, look, I give everybody respect. With me, you have to lose it, but you got it right up front. And I think that's the way people should look at other people. We always be respectful. We always be, no matter what part of life they're in. They could be a janitor. They could be the president. People get treated the same. And, so a lot of the things that I learned in that life have been very, very helpful to me later on. And, again, I want people to understand that, you still have some innate things that you have to fight against. And I'm sure that, when people in the military come back, if they were deployed overseas and they've seen some stuff and it's, they got images in their head like I do of certain things, you have to overcome that. But it's going to be there. It gets better throughout time. If you're continuing to do the right thing, you're continuing to have the right people supporting you, it gets better in time, and those images fade like they do with me. My wife she told me the other day, who were you fighting with last night in your sleep? I think that's when things come out with me, because she tells me so many times. There's times when she'll hit me, wake me up, say, hey, you okay? I think, subconsciously, that's when some of the things that I've seen on the street or that I was engaged in on the street, come out. And so, I mean, it's always there, but it does get better, Chris. It really does.
Now, as far as skills, you mentioned negotiation. Are there any other business skills that our audience should focus on if they're looking to find success? Anything they should particularly focus on in trying to learn?
Well, I wrote a book about that, and it was a business book. And really, what I did in that book, because I said, how can I write a book that's different from everybody else in business? Because I have a different perspective on business, having learned most of my business skills on the street, in legal and illegal ways. So I realized that when we were on the street, the mob philosophy or ideology is that of Machiavelli. And the bottom line with Machiavelli is the end justifies the means. You could do anything you have to do to be a success. You just have to always appear to be upright and honest and have an integrity. But you can do whatever's necessary to succeed. That's kind of the Machiavellian way, and that's the way we followed on the street. And I became a tremendous believer or advocate of Solomon in the book of Proverbs. I think his teachings are brilliant. And if you can absorb Solomon and live your life the way Solomon laid it out, do your business the way Solomon laid it out, I believe you can have tremendous success. And so, I've gotten away from Machiavelli's ideology and kind of taken on Solomon's ideology, and that's what works for me. So it'd be kind of hard to get into now because I wrote a whole book about it, but,
and that's making an offer you can't refuse, right?
Yes, and I think it would be wise because it's not only business skill. There's kind of life skills in that book that I go into that I think could be helpful.
Outstanding, and we'll get that linked up on the show notes. A few other things I just want to get into here. You mentioned that government corruption and your father was framed, right, and that gave you kind of a lifelong, I guess you could say, grudge against the government, grudge against corrupt law enforcement. Is that still going on today? And what do you think about, let's say, and I don't want to drag you into politics, but the way the impeachment thing's going on right now, as far as due process and things like that?
Well, I'm glad you brought it up, and I want to make one point clear because I do a lot of I've learned, or I've tried my best to stay out of politics on social media. I have a fairly big following, and a lot of stuff gets posted, but it becomes such a flashpoint, and people don't understand. I just want to make my position. I'm conservative in my thinking and my leaning. Obviously, I'm a Christian. I have conservative values. With Trump as president, it's not personal. I'm not going out to dinner with Trump, and I'm not singing his praises personally as a man. I don't know him, but I believe in his agenda for America. And what's important for me is what's good for my country, what's good for the future of my children and grandchildren. And I believe that his policies, promote what I believe is right for my country. That's it. And if it was another person with a different name doing the same thing, I would do that. I don't get into his personal life, and there's things that he does that I don't approve of. I think he puts his foot in his mouth quite often. I kind of understand why, because he always seems to be on the defensive, fighting back. I get it. It's not that. But here's what gets me. I have never, now you're talking from a guy on the street that's seen a lot, and I want to make this clear. My father, 100% framed. I will take that to my grave. My father was not a bank robber. I investigated that case thoroughly for over 20 years. We uncovered so much evidence to prove that he was set up and framed, okay? Me, I went to jail for a crime I was guilty of. Pled guilty, did my time. No problem with that. That's the government's job. The police, the law enforcement, they're out to get criminals, and if a criminal does something wrong, they are to be indicted, prosecuted, and if they're found guilty, sent to prison. I believe in that. Even myself, I have no gripe there. But I can tell you this, I have never witnessed the level of corruption that I see going on in Washington at such high levels as I've ever seen in my life. And the thing is, it's so out there. It's not, people don't even hide it anymore. The hypocrisy is just, it's mind-boggling to me. And, I guess as a person of faith, I guess as a person that's experienced it all, and I see this and I say, how could this be happening? How could people be so, out there and just lying and stealing and cheating? I just don't get it. And we keep putting these people back in office. And this is on both sides. Yeah, I'm concerned. I don't consider myself a Republican. I'm an independent. Look, I liked, President Obama early on. In his first term, I would have voted for him, not in the second term, because I thought he let me down in some of the things I thought he was going to do for America. I was a Clinton advocate for a long time. I love John F. Kennedy. So it's not a Republican-Democrat thing. It's just my values, a conservative. But, and I don't want to ramble on, but another thing. I think one of the greatest, and I'm not saying this because I'm on your show, I've said this over the years consistently, one of the greatest errors in our government is not taking care of our veterans. When I hear some of the things that these veterans have to go through, these are people that, gave up their lives to protect our country, whether they were in active duty or not. They're prepared to go, and this is what they've done, and this is what they're doing. And to treat them, medically and the ways that we treat them is it's mind-boggling. I don't understand how a civilized nation, can treat people that defend their country like that.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, you look at what's going on, and if you are somebody who wants the best for America, and you see what's going on, you see how people are dragging this out into what's essentially a personal grudge. It's very frustrating. One more question on just on this subject. We had there was a big rally yesterday in Virginia as far as gun advocates go, and you, having been on both sides of the law, right, having been a criminal and having been somebody who has turned their life around and is now an upstanding member of society. How do you view the gun debate? Do you think that making guns illegal will allow for less of them get into the hands of criminals?
Absolutely not. I'm a Second Amendment advocate. I don't own a gun. Okay, I'm a convicted felon, and I don't own a gun. But I'm an advocate of lawful people having the right to bear arms. Listen, there are over 300 million guns. If today, okay, in the next hour, if you told me to go out and get a gun, Chris, and bring it back to you, I can do it. Mm-hmm. They're not going to stop. They're not going to stop people getting guns illegally. Okay. By making them illegal for everybody. They're just not. As a matter of fact, for me, there'll be more of a gun trade, of an illegal gun trade out there, because people are still going to want to have them. It's ridiculous. It really is. The Second Amendment was put in there for a purpose. And look, listen, when you look at it today, I know what our founding fathers were thinking, that they never wanted the government to become so powerful that they can overcome the people that they represent. Today, I mean, I don't think people on the street can ever defeat, the might of our military. But look, in situations where, lawful people, law-abiding people were able to bear arms, they've been able to save lives. And why shouldn't we have that privilege and that right in America? And people don't understand this. I think they just pander to what they think people want to hear. Illegal guns are going to be in the hands of everybody for the end of time, illegal weapons. And there's no, making them illegal for law-abiding people that's going to change that. It's ridiculous for people that advocate against gun owning by legal people. It's just ridiculous. They don't get it. They've never been on the street. They don't understand it. It's not going to prove anything. Same like the drug business. They can make drugs legal. You think there's not going to be an illegal trade on the street? You think it's not even going to? Of course it will. It doesn't make sense. Right.
And then you add to that, there's people like you in your former life out in the world who will see that as a business opportunity. By creating a black market around it, or more of a black market than already exists, right?
Absolutely. And I think that people, they don't have an understanding of the street. They don't understand the criminal mind. They don't understand the black market, and they want to just, everything they want to legislate. Everything's got to be a law. Everything's got to be illegal. We have so many laws on the books. I mean, that's not the answer to everything.
Absolutely. One last thing, I know you've got a lot out there, right? So you've got your ministry, you've been working on a couple of different projects here, as far as film projects, TV projects. What else do you have going on, and what can people expect from you?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, I was in Las Vegas yesterday. We have a show now that'll be premiering in April in Vegas called A Mob Story. and it's really the history of the mob in Las Vegas set to music and dance. It's a great show. We had a 6-month run about a year ago, and now we're coming back on the Strip in Las Vegas. I'm now going into the personal coaching business, I would say, because over the years, so many people have wanted me to be a personal coach, a mentor to them, and it's kind of difficult. So I've created a environment which I can do that in an organized way, and we're going to be introducing that in February. I'm just getting involved in a television show with a major production company. It's going to be a TV series based upon my former life. And it looks like now I'm just given a green light, which I've resisted over the years, to have a movie developed on my life personally. So, we have a lot of things going on. And, of course, my speaking career and my ministry is, God has been so good in that regard. I'm speaking now all over the world. I'll be in the United Kingdom over the summer. I'm doing a tour there in various parts of the world. And I'm writing another book. So, I just want your viewers, your listeners to understand I'm probably the most blessed guy, most fortunate guy that's walking around right now in many ways, because I've had so many, blessings fall upon me with my family and my business and my ministry that I'm just thankful every day. I really mean that. Even on the rough days, I'm still thankful because I know I got a lot more than I deserve.
Yeah. And the big thing to understand is that, I think that's because you opened yourself up to it, and you took the opportunity to really let God in your life, and whether you're religious or not, you let goodness into your life. You open your mind up to see another way to live, and you worked for those opportunities. And, for that, I really want to acknowledge you, because, you're somebody who I look up to as someone who's literally turned their life around, who walked a really bad path, and then who went through hell yourself here on earth, and then who is now trying to do your best to redeem and to serve others. So again, thank you so much, Michael.
Well, I appreciate that, Chris. But again, it's always the people that have around you. I always say one of my most telling quotes is that you are who you hang out with in this world. And I've been fortunate to have, people that love me, and that have really meant meant well for me and wanted to keep me straight, that have kept me straight. And then, of course, it all comes down to your faith. For me, my faith in God. And, Jesus Christ has been my hero in life. And I say this, and I direct people towards Jesus to look at his qualities as a man. Mm-hmm. In the Gospels, they talk about Jesus of Nazareth. And you look at his qualities as a man, he was truly a man's man. He's a man to want to emulate in your life. And he's all about love and goodness, and he was a strong man. And he's been my hero. And the fact that he, I believe he's the world has been my motivation in life to do the right thing, to do it for him and to do it for the people around me. And like I said, I've been so blessed to have the right people around me to keep me accountable, both in my family, my friends, in my church. And that's been the key for me. So, you people that are struggling out there, remember that we're not meant to do this alone. I know I spent 3 years in solitary, and Chris, that wasn't easy. We were not meant to be solo creatures. We were meant to be social. And we need to have people around us that hold us accountable, that love us, that want to see us stay on the path that we care about. And that's what keeps you straight. That's it. For me, that's the secret. It's God and good people.
Absolutely. Well, again, Michael, thank you so much. Thank you for giving out your wisdom today and for being with us today. And, to everybody out there, definitely check out some of these resources, the books that Michael's written, his website, his new projects, and go back through this episode with a notepad and a pen, and really take some notes here, because I think he went into some really solid stuff today, and I think that we all can learn from this. So, Michael, thank you again for coming on today, and to everybody out there, keep the faith and get out there and live your best lives while you can.
Well, Chris, and thank you. And thanks for what you do, encouraging a lot of the veterans, a lot of people in the military. And anytime that I can be of help, and I mean this sincerely, because I believe in in really supporting our veterans and our people that are in the military right now. Any way that I can be of help, if I can, just call on me. I'm there.
Absolutely. And where's the best place to reach you on social media? Is it Twitter or Instagram?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. You know, you gotta be on all of those when you do what I do. So yeah, that's you can reach out to me there. You got my email. You know, I answer that email directly. So anytime, just give me a holler and I'll do my best to be there.
100%. All right. Thank you guys so much. We'll be back at you soon.
All right, Chris. Thanks. God bless.